America has the most powerful military in human history. 11 aircraft carriers, hundreds of bases ringing the planet, the world's reserve currency sitting in nearly every bank on Earth. By the numbers, the United States could squeeze almost any country until it broke. And then there's China, which looks at all of that and doesn't blink. It builds islands in contested seas. It absorbs American tariffs and fires its own straight back. When Washington pushes, Beijing pushes harder and keeps right on going. So here's the question. The strongest country in the world is standing right there, and China simply isn't afraid of it. Why not? What does China have that lets it stare down the most powerful nation on Earth? It comes down to a handful of things China has spent the last 20 years building on purpose. Let me show you each one. Start with the one fight everyone actually worries about, a war over Taiwan. And look at where it would happen. Taiwan sits about 100 miles off China's coast. America would be fighting that war 7,000 miles from home, across the widest ocean on the planet, at the far end of a supply line that stretches half the globe. China has turned that distance into a weapon. It built the largest force of land-based missiles in the world, and a huge share of them exist for a single purpose: to keep American aircraft carriers from ever getting close. They are nicknamed the Carrier Killer, and there's the DF-26, often nicknamed the Guam Killer, and its range reaches all the way out to America's own base on Guam. This is what people miss when they imagine a war with China. We picture Iraq, where the US rolled in and crushed a weaker army in the open. China made sure it would never be that. The moment American ships sail into the waters near China, they sail under a sky packed with missiles built to sink them. America's carriers are the most fearsome weapons on Earth in the open ocean, and almost a liability the closer they get to China's shore. So the very thing that makes America scary, its ability to project force anywhere, mostly stops working in the one place it would be needed. China doesn't fear the carriers because China built the wall that keeps them out. Underneath it all sits the bluntest fact of all. China has nuclear weapons, and it's building a lot more. For decades, China kept a small arsenal. That's changing fast. Its stockpile has pushed past 600 warheads and is expected to climb well beyond 1,000 within a few years. With nuclear weapons, you don't have to match your rifle. You only need enough to make attacking you unthinkable. No one conquers a country that can erase their cities. It doesn't matter how many carriers or bases or troops you have. The worst thing America could ever do to China, march in and take it over, was quietly removed from the menu the day China became a serious nuclear power. That alone takes the existential fear off the table, and a country that can't be conquered doesn't have to flinch. There's a group of strange-sounding metals called rare earths, and they go inside almost everything modern: fighter jets, guided missiles, electric cars, phones, wind turbines. China mines around 60% of the world's supply and refines close to 90% of it. It makes the overwhelming majority of the powerful magnets built from them. For the hardest-to-source versions, China has been nearly the only source on the planet, and China has shown, recently, that it will pull this lever. When Washington stacked tariffs on Chinese goods that climbed past 100%, Beijing answered by tightening exports of rare earths and magnets. Within weeks, car factories
In America,
Europe and Japan were warning they might have to stop the lines because the parts weren't arriving. Think about what that means. China controls a critical choke point in the supply chain for materials used in many U.S. weapons systems, giving Beijing significant leverage during economic and geopolitical disputes. You don't fear a country whose weapons you help build. China sits on a valve attached to America's own war machine, and everyone in the room knows it. The only way to really force China's hand would be to push things to the edge. And once you do, China knows that America has an enormous amount to lose. The two economies are stitched together so tightly that they can barely move without dragging each other along. America buys a staggering amount of what China makes. China holds piles of American debt and parks much of its wealth in the American financial system. They are tangled up in each other. That tangle protects China. A real confrontation wouldn't just hurt China, it would tear a hole straight through the American economy, empty store shelves, and spike prices for ordinary Americans overnight. China knows American leaders have to answer to voters who would feel that pain immediately. So when China weighs whether America will really push things to the edge, it sees a country that has an enormous amount to lose the moment it does. Here's a number that should stop you. By some U.S. Navy estimates, China's shipbuilding capacity is more than 200 times America's. Not 200 times. China's yards can pump out warships and commercial vessels at a pace the United States cannot come close to matching anymore. This is the kind of advantage that decides long wars. America still has the bigger, more battle-tested Navy today, but a fight near China wouldn't be settled in a weekend, and in a drawn-out contest, the side that can replace what it loses wins. China is the workshop of the world. It can build and rebuild faster than anyone. America would be trying to fight a marathon against the one country built to outproduce it, right on that country's home ground. China doesn't fear a long war with America. And maybe the deepest reason of all is about time and patience. American politics runs in short, loud cycles. Leaders change every few years. The country argues with itself constantly. And after 2 long wars in the Middle East, a lot of Americans have no appetite for another one. America finds it hard to stay locked on a single goal for decades at a stretch. China's planners think in those decades. They set goals for where they want to be in 10, 20, 30 years and grind towards them while administrations in Washington come and go. When you're convinced that time is on your side, that all you have to do is keep building and waiting while your rival gets distracted, China looks at America and doesn't see a country to be afraid of. It sees one to outlast. So why doesn't China fear America? Because over 20 quiet years, China made sure it didn't have to. It built a wall of missiles that keeps America's carriers at arm's length. It built a nuclear force that puts conquest out of reach. It took control of the materials America's own weapons depend on. It wove itself so deeply into the American economy that a real fight would bleed both of them. It built the factories to outproduce anyone in a long war, and it set its sights on a finish line so far out that it's happy to wait while America wears itself out. Put all of that together, and you don't have a country looking nervously at a stronger neighbor. You have a country that decided deliberately to make itself impossible to push around, and then did it. That's why China doesn't fear America. It made sure it never had to.